Hello and welcome to Roadmap 2023, our election issues and personalities tracking program. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Thanks for joining us. Even though my guest on today's edition was not physically present during this election season, the reports on the various issues of concern were predictable as the signs were there well before the season began, according to my guest. My guest also says the emergence of a third force in the nation's politics was a much-needed tonic, although my guest also says some of the latter-day developments have robbed that third force of some of its potency. In his first television interview since the 2023 election season took place, Roadmap 2023 talks to Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka. Prof, it's nice to see you again. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Largely, what we've been busy doing is that we've been electing new leaders while over the last month or so, presidential, National Assembly, governorship, state houses of assembly. What did you make of the whole process? We've done it again, another time. Probably the seventh time for those who are counting from 1999. What did you make of this one?
Well, not exactly the most edifying exercise that we've been through. I've been away, of course, quite a lot, and deliberately, since I was going to be physically away, I preferred not to make comments. But that didn't mean I didn't receive from time to time reports and from what was happening here. And it was not altogether unanticipated for one simple reason. The nation was moving towards a situation not planned, just one of these things which happened fortuitously, where the mold, the existing mold, was going to be broken. And the signs were there that there would be die-hard opposition to the breaking of that mold. In fact, my apprehensions were on such a level that Emeka Anyoko, the former Secretary General of Commonwealth, and I, with whom I interact quite a lot, decided at a last meeting before I traveled out that we should prepare a statement, a formal statement, appealing to the politicians not to let this mere electoral process be the commencement of a total unhealable rupture among the politicians. And I think before I left, I was supposed to send him a draft, which we then both look at. Something happened anyway, I had to dash out immediately, and that was that. But, elections should be keenly contested. But I still believe very much in what I call the Fashola dictum. You may remember at one time he said that elections should be like festivals. There should be yet another aspect of the festive spirit of humanity. And this was anything but festive. What was most distressing, in fact, so distressing that I felt I should reach out here from my base in Abu Dhabi at New York University. I should reach out and try and make a statement. Unfortunately, the technology didn't work, because I was going to make an appeal from Abu Dhabi. And also just put in an oar into the troubled waters. But again, there's technology.
Made that difficult, if not next to impossible.
Yes, but thank you. So, but on arriving, of course, I checked. I came in for the World Poetry Day, and immediately, of course, I was bombarded by the most horrendous tales, narratives, both pre and after election. Since then, I've also read columns. I've seen Nigerian papers for the first time in months, and I didn't like what I read at all. It's like trust has broken down completely, and even the restraints, the minimal restraints that we've learned to expect from seasoned politicians have been jettisoned completely. And then my mind also went to, because we're now moving into certain aspects of what I have observed and also interrogated. I had to go back in the archives to meetings which had been held before, 3 to my special recollection, one in Enugu, one in which was organized by doctors, a doctors' medical association in the United States, South United States, where I lectured. Right. And the third one at the Muson in Lagos on the theme Hands Across the Niger. And the last one, I think, was Hands Across the Nation, and I delivered lectures there. And with those civilized encounters, with the give and take, the very calm analysis of our history, the prospects, etc., I just couldn't help wondering how things deteriorated so fast, unraveled so fast. The promise of all those meetings, the inter-ethnic understanding, and a very calm and calculated clinical approach to our history, and I said the prospects. So it hasn't been a very pleasant homecoming for me, personally.
Now, many people hearing you say this would be surprised, because this would be possibly your first comments on these elections. But if what we read online were to be believed, you had made several comments in the recent past concerning these elections. And so when people try to square that with what you're saying now, they get confused. Did you, in fact, make those comments? For example, did you say that regardless of who is in Aso Rock, the North would be ruling Nigeria, would be in charge of Nigeria, so you're not really bothered about who's in Aso Rock, because that would always be the case?
I was horrified when the statements were sent to me. I can tell you, I'm repeating, I have not made a comment, deliberately stayed away from making a comment. Since the electoral pistol was fired, I have not said anything in public. In private, of course, I've discussed things, but I've never made a statement. And we've denounced these, both myself and those who look after my affairs, we've denounced this fake news over and over again. And all I have to say now, and we've been closing down certain portals which we were able to, fake platforms attributed to me with my photograph. The whole process has been so sickening. And I'd hope that while I was away, being away physically would even lessen the orgy of falsification. On the contrary, it seemed to have worked the opposite way. It was like, oh, he's away, he won't see it in time, and we would have done the damage we wanted to do anyway. And it's and what sickens me even more than those who actually write it is the way it is circulated among ordinary intelligent people who do not throw away this garbage or come out. As occasionally somebody like Shola Adeyeye, for instance, I remember when he, even without contacting me, and said robustly, Wole Soyinka could never have said such a thing. And this for me is the kind of posture which intelligent Nigerians should learn to adopt by now. If it was possible for somebody to fake a platform named after the new Nobel laureate and use that platform to announce my obituary, yet another obituary, another death, saying I dropped dead. I use the expression, creating distress, among people. I enjoy it when I read it.
Yeah, you took
but I stopped. I don't enjoy it anymore because I know it is causing distress, emotional distress to a number of people. And on the other hand, it is creating an atmosphere which is extremely dangerous for this nation. When things are attributed to me on that level, in which I'm supposed to be speaking sweepingly about ethnic groups, about religious groups, and so on, for me, this is a conspiracy towards chaos. Because people will take it, some people, those who take it seriously and will say, I see. Well, this is where he is now. Well, we had better now go our own way. It's very dangerous. And I really wish, in fact, I was telling of one young semi-protege of mine. He was asking me why I hadn't commented on what's going on. I said, please, just get away. Where have you commented on all the rubbish being attributed, being stuffed in my mouth in my absence? You're a columnist, you're on a newspaper, you have your platform. Have you actually come out aggressively to attack this phenomenon, this evil of fake news, fake attribution? Not a word have I spoken until this moment publicly on this election in any aspect. So what does one do with that?
But do you think, Prof, it's our own understanding of the nature of democracy? Because a number of people I've spoken to, of course, very few of them have the kind of experience, the kind of knowledge and background that you have, say that partly our problem, if you want to call it that, or our challenge when we come to this election cycle is that for many in our own society, democracy is about elections, whereas elections are only a part of democracy.
That's right.
Other equally important, possibly even more important parts of democracy than the actual election. Do you agree, or do you think that it is correct to say that we do not understand democracy as a people, and therefore that is affecting, all these outcomes, especially when we go through this exercise every 4 years or so?
Well, I don't think it's that we do not understand democracy. Is that certain stakes have been catapulted to the fore and have come to overwhelm what should be the real stuffing of the democratic process. I'll give you an example. In fact, one of the reasons why I refuse to endorse any candidate or be seen, forget what people put in my mouth, is that as far as I was concerned, none of the candidates for me actually addressed things which were closest to my heart. Like, again, reconstructing the nation. Yeah, there were token statements here and there that I read, but I didn't really see any genuine commitment, any believable agenda about, quote unquote, restructuring, decentralization, which is at the heart for me of Nigeria's problem at the moment. People were more concerned, in my view, with just aiming for power. Now, it's not all about reconstruction. There's also the redressing of history. Let me explain what I mean by that. I mean the things which Mecca and I used to discuss and even work towards. For instance, we believe that to close this circle of negativities that we have embarked upon just before and including the Civil War, I happen to believe, for instance, that the presidency, as soon as possible, should go towards the eastern region, which lost a war. That this is one of the ways to heal the wounds of the nature. Now, that is a principle, a philosophy. And towards that end, for instance, I can reveal to you, when I formed a party at one time, the Democratic Front for the People's Federation, right, which Obasanjo at the time refused to register. I mention him because he was the one dictating to INEC, so don't tell me I should say INEC. Let me anticipate that. And then we teamed up with the African Renaissance Party, which was registered. A small party who had an office along the Badagry Road, but at least they were registered. And our candidate at the time was Patutome. Many people don't remember that. Didn't work out. Doesn't matter. These things don't happen suddenly. It's a progression. The following election, Emeka Anyaoku, for instance, phoned me one morning and said, "Have you heard about this young man called Kingsley Moghalu?" And I said, "Do you think he's the kind of person we're looking for?" He said, "I think so." So we met, and we decided we're going to back Kingsley Moghalu. Later on, for reasons best, which I didn't even bother to probe very much, Anyaoku sort of withdrew a little bit, I was left holding the baby. I didn't mind. I enjoyed it. I believed in it, absolutely. But what did I get? What did I get in response from quarters which I thought would understand what we were trying to do? They came at me and said I was splitting the votes of the Igbo. And, when I encounter situations like that, I come close to saying, do these people understand the complexities of democracy? That democracy is actually linked up, with issues beyond the immediate. It's linked up also with history. How did we get here? Is this where we want to be? How do we get out of it? What are the various prospects? And you strengthen democracy by using democratic means of making changes to arrive at your vision of society, which is what I've always done, what I've always believed in. And when I encounter a situation where the ethnic issue, which is permanently there,
or to fall a lot during this election.
Oh, yes. Or the religious issue becomes paramount, rather than a holistic look at history and a commitment to change within society, then I come close to really thinking with you that maybe what you just said was right, that maybe our people have not really, penetrated through to the intricacies of democracy, to the principles, to the imperatives in a total comprehensive manner, so that they only pick at one time, or one thing, one strand at a time. They worry that strand to death, and in the process, they strangle one another, where possible, with the strands, those bits and pieces that they've taken out of a totality. And of course, there are opportunists.
Who also manipulate the space.
They understand what democracy is about, but they also know how to manipulate the processes of democracy, how to twist the urgencies, the imperatives of the democratic ethos. They know how to twist it. They know how to play on raw emotions, on primitive instincts. They know how to just set one side against another simply to arrive at their goal, which is power. Unstinted power, selfish, alienating power, just power. That's what they're after.
Now, Prof, you earlier said that even though it was disappointing, you were sad to learn about quite a number of the things that were reported to have happened, but that they weren't really surprising because there had been a build-up even before you traveled. And that then led me to think, perhaps, what was this build-up? Because for many people, it came as a shock, some kind of surprise. They were bewildered largely, and maybe with the benefit of hindsight, to some extent naive about the workings of our own society. Many people assumed that we had overcome quite a number of the religious differences because there was so much intermarriage and all of that across ethnic groups and so on, that, look, quite a number of these things we had put behind us, only for them to resurface with a vengeance in this election cycle. Is that perhaps what you meant by, what exactly did you mean?
Yes. All right. So there are building blocks towards the democratic edifice, always. And what we're witnessing is that as those building blocks, and by that I mean meetings like Hands Across the Niger, Hands Across the Nation, private meetings, group meetings, always with a focus in mind where you want to go eventually. Like, what kind of system do you want? What kind of ideology should bind all of you together? And which political party best promotes that ideology? All those building blocks have been knocked away, so that there was no difference left between, for instance, the two major parties. movements of individuals across a totally vitiated identity, ideological identity. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Now, another building block, when we told the youth, listen, you have enormous voting power. Why don't you meet among yourselves? Give us a consensus candidate. I met literally all the young people. I'm talking about the last election,
Yes.
you know.
Not this circle.
Not this one, no.
Right.
The last one, I met all the young people. I addressed them at a place not far from Alausa collectively. I addressed them individually in twos and threes. I told those, I won't mention, they said, look, don't waste your time. There's no way I will back somebody like you, you know. And I remember one of them complaining, I wasn't looking for a godfather, as if I offered to be his godfather. I already have enough godsons. But anyway, these meetings went on. So this is a part of the building blocks. And when they failed, for instance, I remember once we invited Obi Okwesili to try and negotiate among themselves, then she ended up becoming a candidate, remember?
Herself.
So it was all very complicated, you know. But one by one, those building blocks were being knocked away by seasoned politicians because they saw what was happening. They saw the possibility of a change. And they're politicians. Your life is politics. You're not going to sit down. I mean, people, as somebody once said, you don't sit down and wait for democracy to fall in your lap. You have to work for it. You have to fight for it, you know. You have to negotiate for it. But don't sacrifice your principles. And so we have those other blocks. In other words, this election actually is a consequence. I mean, what happened at these elections, the emergence, for instance, of quote-unquote a third force. You see, it didn't happen overnight. It's a build-up on all those blocks I have already cited. And so the moment came when it seemed as if we had reached a mass moment. Unfortunately, a bit of fascism, from our observation, and this is one of the reasons why I was happy I was away at the time, a lot of fascism was creeping in. People saw what was supposed to happen, what we expected to happen, to be a divine command, to be inevitable, and to be right there and then, and began to act fascistically to other people. If you disagree with them on strategy, on even little issues of tactics, because they kept communicating with me that we don't like what we're seeing, what's developing here. So once again, the building blocks were not even just by the old brigade, but even by the youth. Oh, I forgot to mention SARS. SARS was another build-up. NSARS was another build-up. You know, significant momentum in the mobilization of alternative force within the nation. So there was alarm. One, by the old brigade, and as I said, there was a creeping fascism within the ranks by the new brigade. I watched a program, and when I watched this person speaking on air, I said, I understand, I can see what I was hearing now about. I could see how this new force was beginning to lose momentum, was beginning to lose even support because of a fascistic tendency among the followers. But I watched that program. Go and watch all the programs yesterday. You'll see that. I don't want to mention names or anything of the sort, but you will know the one I'm talking about. That how could a Democrat, a self-described Democrat, aspiring to power by democratic means, speak like that, in that inciting way, in that denigration of all the structures which are supposed in the end to come to the aid of an election. Those structures will not guarantee they will not decide the result, but they at least will guarantee a reasonable, sustainable edifice of the democratic process. And I listened to that man talking, and I said, oh God, Nigeria is in trouble.
Now, Prof, part of the reason why I said earlier that, and why I thought you were someone we could talk to about the nature of democracy, the way our own democracy has evolved, and why we seem, shall we say, to be off the rails with it, goes back to your own struggles against, shall we say, the entrenched or vested interests.
The what, sorry?
The entrenched or vested interests.
Yes.
Because I again went back and had to read up your encounter in Western Nigeria, where you felt you had no option. You walked into a radio station in Ibadan and replaced the tape with yours. And that was at the height of the struggle between the progressives, as it was then known, and the northern conservatives, if you like, who were in alliance with the party in the West at that time. Of course, this was all the period of Operation Wet Year and all that. Really tense. Of course, all of that was swept away by the coup of January 1966. So you've come a long way with this. And I wonder, as we progressed down that road, the interregnum of military, many people blame the military, that they're the ones who took us off the rails, and we haven't been back because they haven't left. They've only changed uniforms. Is that really true? Is it that foundationally we weren't set for this? And that's why we're getting it wrong. Because people point to Ghana and say that, they got independence about the same time. They seem to have gotten a lot of it right. Not everything, but a lot of it, certainly a lot more than we have. So when you make that kind of comparison, and given the background for which you came, Prof, what do you see? How is this unfolding? Because still, now you are still fighting.
The comparison with Ghana is very just. I keep referring to the day when the election at which Kufuor, who was incumbent, was, he lost the election, and he was the one who stepped in, and the people were ready to move, to destroy and everything. And he said, no, let it stand. And he moved away. He conceded, even though the results had been, glaring. It was really terrible. I remember I was around that time. I was doing some research into the slave, the Saharan slave trade. So I was actually physically there in the northern part of Ghana, where the trouble was about to begin. And yet the president at the time just said, stepped aside. Same as, for instance, Jonathan did here. But the precedent was over there in Ghana, and that was a glorious moment for democracy on the West, especially the West African section. But I want to go back to the wet year issue. By the time the incident you're talking about happened, the elections were not yet over, but they were over. Even before the election started, the elections were over. If you remember, the deputy premier went on air, arrogant, boastful, saying, whether you vote for us or not, the angels in heaven will come and vote for us. So you already saw what was going to happen in that elections, and they did not disappoint. And they were brutal. Let's not go into details, but let's just say that democracy had already totally broken down, and there was no pretense about it. You had judges being summoned by the premier. Justice Shaw has written about it, if you don't take my word for it, summoned in advance and being told this is the way you want things to go. And all this was out in the open. So battle was joined. There's no question at all about that. I like to place my so-called intervention in its proper perspective. So in this particular case, however, we've had, I wouldn't say that we've had, yes, I will even say that there has been, at least to all appearances, a level playing ground. And therefore, it's one of those instances where I believe that we must take the position that the process is not yet ended. is not yet ended. And until the final pronouncement is made, as far as I'm concerned, the electoral process is still on. As long as there are avenues still, and there were none at the time we're talking about, absolutely none. As long as the avenues still exist for contesting what has already been contested, well, for me, the democratic process, the electoral process is still on. We can still come back, I believe, to that phase, that moment when we all said, when we had a common purpose, and we said, enough of military rule. I'm talking about June 12th. Yeah. And everyone came together and demonstrated, not just to ourselves, but to the whole world, that yes, we know what democracy is, and we know how to practice it. And unfortunately, we seem not to have succeeded in reaching that level of democratic concert, as we exhibited when we said, look, let us take back our own volition, our political volition, and get rid of the khaki boys. And we can still come back to it. The first thing is this, that even with this election, we can still come back to it. The first thing is, I believe that all these political contestants firing brickbats at each other, I think the first thing is for them to send all their spokesmen and women on vacation and say that, okay, we reached the major phase, we've completed the major phase of the electoral process. Thank you very much. You've spoken for us enough. From now on, we'll speak in our own voices. I say this in all seriousness, because again, I sent for the paper, I read the papers of Saturday and Sunday since I came, and I read the pronouncements of one of the spokesmen of the political parties. And I asked myself, is this coming before the violence which I've been reading about in Lagos, or is it coming after? It's like what was happening, what has been reported happening, and which people whom I rely on have described to me in Lagos State, for instance. It's like it was happening somewhere in the Ukraine, to read what this fellow, who's supposed to be a lawyer, educated, and who's been also from one party to the other, and back again, and then back again, to read what this, for me, young man was writing at the height of turmoil between ethnic groups in Lagos, when by now he should be busy now pouring oil on troubled waters. This fascistic language, which I've complained about earlier, was coming out of this, spilling out vitriol in the pen. I think the politicians should send all their spokespeople away on vacation, so that we know then that we're dealing directly with the principals. That way, they also will be in calmer waters, not being, not being, even their normal natures being violated, being converted, and they're submitting, they feel maybe it's good for them, and so on and so forth. I think all secondaries should be taken, send them on leave to the Ukraine, for instance, Sorry, Ukraine is very much on my mind, as you see, for good reasons. And then let the process take its place. Above all, we who consider ourselves educated, civilized, you consider ourselves not alienated from people, we'll do whatever we can to just smoothen over the breaches which have been committed since those initiatives hand across the Niger and across the nation. Just get back to civilized conduct. And wherever the chips fall, this is the level, the stage at which democracy, the process has reached in Nigeria. It will never go back from here. I mean, the mold has been broken. A pattern has been set. People are discovering that they're not as powerless, especially the young, as powerless as they think. More than a point has been made, a goal has been scored. Let's put it this way. And I think that's a way for people to approach what is, what's taking place right now.
Many are scared, though, Prof. And they point back and they say that, our own experience was one in which we were again one very prime example of where those who fought for the restoration of democracy, sometimes putting their lives at risk, quite a number of them lost their lives in the process. You came close to that, spent 4 years thereabouts in exile, and even then, your life was in danger, even in exile. And then when this democracy was to be restored, some of those who fought alongside you had said, well, yeah, then we took a back seat. And then the same rascals, I'm quoting now, that the same rascals who we just finished fighting simply took off the uniforms that we said we disliked and then dressed like us and then joined the fray. But then we took a back seat, and by we they meant people like you. Was that, with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps an error? Because all the things you talk about, many of those people also talk about it. But then they were not, and they still are not in the fray. So perhaps the level of conduct is just that bit lower because they aren't seeing it the way you are or have.
Well, let me tell you something that happened to me. I was going through my archives, trying to get them together, for acquisition and so on, And I was astonished and exhausted. In other words, I was not exhausted at the time. But going through my papers, correspondence, communication, the fight from Nadeko, my own Nalicon, the efforts at political parties which made the meetings, the marches, the tear gassing, the exchanges, which, however determined, were never as corrupted in language as we've been treated today, but just simply the enormity of what I found myself doing all the time. Let me tell you something. I was so glad that I was going to be out of this country for some time. I felt, look, take a rest.
Breather.
Yeah, just take a sabbatical. This time, not forced, because the other sabbatical
Was forced.
was 24 hours, non-stop, all around 7 days a week and so on. But take a sabbatical, just do some teaching. And don't forget that among all these various things we talk about, some of us actually thought seriously of seeking power, of demanding, of requesting power, so that we could make the changes for which we fought. But we're honest with ourselves. I don't have the temperament of soapbox oratory. I don't have a temperament of the kind of compromises involved necessarily. Let's be pragmatic. All over the world, the kind of compromise is necessary to attain power, where you can make changes. A few individuals did go in, and some of them succeeded, and we watched them. But we also backed. I can tell you, for instance, that we backed certain states. We said among ourselves, well, why don't we try and get power in this state and then demonstrate to the rest of the nation just what a modern society should be like. And remember, when we worked towards and so on, thank goodness we didn't get there, because the person whom we picked, I think the FCC are still looking for him. So there have been efforts to practicalize our sense of, shall we say, our theories of what society should be. Because they go beyond theories. They're not inachievable objectives, goals. No. It's just that something happens to some breed of people when they get in power. They forget the past. And they're so busy, they say with the president, oh, let me just handle this, then I'll get back to business. It's always a mistake. From the moment people, those individuals, they arrive at power, even before they arrive at power, they should have begun to work towards the transformation of society. So I don't think we were wrong to say we'll take a back seat because we were not after power, we're not after office, let me put it that way, we're not after office. We just wanted to interact with our people in a state of civic dignity. That's all. Volition. Don't bully me. Don't take my voice away. Don't take my economic potential away, my economic entitlements. Don't throw me on the mercy of sadists like Emefiele, whatever his name is, the central bank man, who impoverished he and his boss, Buhari, because Buhari's ultimate responsibility rests with him to have allowed this to happen. But this is the expert. This is the one who gives the advice. This is the one who executes the policies and reduce this nation to a state where even a few days ago, I arrived how many days ago, and I sent a check to the bank, and the check came back. They had no cash. One of the bankers eventually brought me something from his own stash, thank you very much, and explained to me what had been going on and how they would sit and wait for money to come. And you can't buy a newspaper, you can't buy guguru and ekpa, which means that the saleswoman cannot pay for the plantain, which means that the farmer cannot even pay for transportation of the goods from his farm to the... Emefiele, this man, I don't know who he is, I never know where he came from, but he's committed a crime against humanity of this nation, over and beyond even any electoral, mago, because he struck at the heart of the subsistence, survival principles, minimal needs and entitlements of the ordinary people in the street.
Prof, even while the political and other contestations go on, you've said it, the larger part of the contest is over, and now you have what happens, and whichever way the chips fall, may they fall that way. But in truth, there is a transition taking place now. General Buhari is leaving, and so are quite a number of governors and other people in other political offices. And there's those who have said to me, for example, that perhaps for the first time since the battle for democracy and June 12th was undertaken and fought to a conclusion, which birthed the Fourth Republic, you actually now have someone who's been declared president who was part of that battle. And this is without prejudice to any of what is going on about the legitimacy or otherwise of the results of the election. I'm just talking about the historical antecedents. And that therefore, perhaps we may now dare to hope that some of the things you've talked about that we seem thus far not to have gotten right, we may be beginning to go there. You talk about a mold being broken.
Yes, sir.
Is that part of the mold being broken?
Yeah, well, sometimes, the saying, to make the omelette, you must first break the egg.
Yes, right.
And that egg has been broken. So what are the ingredients the incumbent needs to put in place to make us a decent, sustainable omelette? Let me begin from the negative side. An awareness, by the way, and I believe this is not conspiracy theory. I believe that there was, and I'd heard about this before, and I have reason to believe it, that there was an agenda from the very beginning to scuttle this election. There was an agenda to scuttle it. There was a prospect of an interim government even before the election took place. A very good reason to believe that. Now the forces behind that interim proposal will not sit still. they will not accept that a transition is taking place. It's no different, let me tell you, it's no different from what happened when Obama became president. Against all odds, the dark horse literally came into power.
Yeah.
And conservatives like Newt Gingrich, I remember, I've never forgotten this, declared openly, said, our mission is to make him fail. He said, it's true, he said, this leftist is something. So yeah, he said, yes, our mission is to make him not succeed, to make his government fail. And so whoever comes in must be aware that that agenda of creating a vacuum into which the ultra-conservatives, the ultra-primitives can step, that agenda is not yet over, and that he has that to contest with. He's got to have a way of managing that in a way which does not even exacerbate the intensity of their, of their assumed hostility. That's one. Two, whoever it is must understand the fact that this country will not cease, the people will not cease demanding a restructuring of this nation. And the sooner it is addressed as part and parcel of the process of governance, of making laws, of debating, of even economic reforms, fiscal attributions, etc., devolution of power within what is possible along the way to the lower tiers of governance, in which I'm always more interested than the center. This is one of the things which, by the way, those animals, those cooked, they extract something from what you said before, and then they build their own fantasies around it. And anyway, that's by the way, And so there must be that focus, the good governance, but also a view of the direction of society. If the two do not go pari passu, the incoming regime will fail, because new voices are being heard, and they are more powerful than before. They are not just whining voices. They are voices,
or wailing voices.
They are voices based on actualities. We have failed in so many directions, and they are saying, let us debate this particular direction. Let's try this direction. And you cannot ignore it. You just cannot. Otherwise, even your economic policies will fail. Your infrastructural transformations will fail. We'll just go back, treading the same old spore. Security, of course. Let's not even go there right now. This is a monumental.
I was going to go there, Prof, because it would appear that that's the big elephant in the room, because even while we discuss every other thing, without security, nothing else is possible. So,
And this is part and parcel of the restructuring that we're talking about. Security is at the heart of it. When you devolve the means, the power and authority and equipment to the grassroots levels, structured, of course, not just vigilantes or anywhere, then people begin to feel comfortable in their own homes. They begin to feel part and parcel of the security system. But if you sit in Aso Rock, with all the tanks surrounding you, and think that, yes, you can, the moment you can send some armored tanks there, I can send some there, you're going to fail. Security has got to be integrated. Just like food production, food distribution, just like culture itself. Security has got to become part and parcel of the cultural life of these people. And that'll only happen through decentralization, a meaningful one, not rhetorical.
You had been quoted as saying, as part of whatever would be the successful recipe, whoever was going to get into authority at whatever level had to do something to stem, and first stem and then reverse the brain drain that is currently going on, not just in Nigeria, by the way, on the African continent. What exactly did you mean by that, and why is that so critical at this point?
Well, because there's a new imperialism taking place. There's a neo-colonization taking place, and it goes beyond the colonization of territory. We're talking about the colonization of minds, We talk compulsory, enforced colonization of minds. We're talking even about something as crude as a re-inauguration of the slave trade. Because what else do you call it? When the security of a nation has become so loose that when we send our children to school, a troop can come in and capture them and then say, come and negotiate their return. What's that? Another phase, more sophisticated phase of the slave trade. So this continent, from here to Uganda, Uganda to Somalia, Somalia to Mauritania, parts even of Central Africa, is being recolonized by forces of religious fundamentalism, real militant fundamentalism. What else do you call it when hundreds, thousands are being killed because some people are so besotted by religion, they want to form a new caliphate? They are already collecting taxes in many, many areas, even in this country. Go along West African coast. We're being recolonized by atavistic forces operating under the name of religion. And not just that, we're being recolonized also by forces on which we depended formerly for the repulsion of colonialism. The Russians are in here. They've got their troops in here. They're in Mali. They're in East Africa. So very soon, we're going to have a resurgence of no longer a scramble for Africa, but a physical battle for Africa, if we don't take our destiny in our own hands. And so when I speak about this repeating the cycle of history, I mean it not just theoretically, not just as a kind of intellectual gambit. No, it's physical. It's what's going on right now.
Much of your writing, and now I take it beyond Nigeria now, much of your writing has been about the jackboot of the oppressor. And you talk about the jackboot of the oppressor without minding the color of the foot in the boot. And that comes from what you've just said now. Because immediately people talk of oppression, they probably don't grasp the various molds, shapes, and forms that it can take. And the one of the mind that you mentioned is probably the most long-lasting, because you can always take back territory, you can always win back money lost, property, and so on. But if you're colonized in the mind, it takes a bit of doing to get out of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where we seem to be now. The youth are practically running away. So even if you got someone who now understood what is to be done, there's no critical mass with which he is to or she is to do it. So it's like perhaps we're running twice as hard not to be able to move forward at all.
In the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Well, this applies virtually to all facets of our life, including, I'm very glad that you raised, including our foreign policy, including our take on obligations to others to arrive even where we are, which is not just satisfactory. Forgive me for going back to Ukraine, I think, when I talk about foreign policy. We hear many of our leaders, and some of our intellectuals too, still think that our relationship with the outer world should be the same as it was when we were not yet independent. We have a false sense of obligation to those who assisted us in arriving at this moment. We fail to choose our models outside. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about both historical models. In other words, what were the parallel conditions outside from which we can learn, parallel to what we have gone through. And this is where Ukraine comes in. When you look at Ukraine, my mind, for instance, goes to Haiti, when Napoleon wanted to conquer, re-enslave Haiti. The Haitians were us. They are what we are. They are us. They are our people. And they resisted France and sent Napoleon running back where he came from. Now, our failure is inability to relate such a slice, a proud slice of our history to what is happening in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians are saying, we don't want recolonization. I'm not interested in, this did this in the past, this one did that. No. I'm asking, what is the condition? How do we interpret, how do we translate, analyze what is happening in the Ukraine in relation to our history and in relation to our prospects? And you find that the parallels are really instructive. If we, for instance, don't take the right position, the terrors, the old brigade we're talking about, the power terrorists will do to us internally what Russia is doing to the Ukraine. This is one of the failures in thinking, of some of our leadership. They don't realize that models are being set outside, which are very attractive to the reactionary elements within our society. They just say, yes, America did this over there. America, well, they give it that. I'm asking, what did the world do to us that we can see being reflected in what is being done in other parts of the world? For me, that's where the real lesson lies. And if we take the right attitude towards that, without any intervention, if we learn those lessons, then we will get rid of our own power terrors once and for all here. If, however, we allow yet again our leaders to take the side of power against freedom, we'll have no mouth to talk. As the saying is, if the old brigade come gunning for us, if we hear tomorrow that Abacha has risen from his grave, and then start looking and say, yes, what did you say, what did you do when such and such a thing happened outside? Let's go. Trump invaded the White House, screaming, my mandate was stolen. Policemen were killed. People were traumatized for life. Now, that is the kind of example being seen as a model by some of our people. You can see it spreading, first through Brazil, Belo Nasra, or whatever that is his name, yes, who then did a Trump at least attempted it, and it's already moving to the African continent.
Absolutely.
Where say, after all, people didn't say anything over there. No, let's learn from the mistakes of others, the errors of others. That at least we can do for ourselves. But above all, if we say we don't even need any models, we have enough intelligence quotient here on the African continent to direct our own destiny.
Prof, my final question to you would be one that would call upon your skills of character portrayal. And that is because for most people, they will never have some of the opportunities that you have had to be at junctions, if you like, of our history. And unfortunately, unlike you, most of these others do not leave historical records behind of their roles. Dim Chukwemeka Odumegwu didn't write any book. General Abacha, whom you just mentioned, didn't. And there are quite a number of others. General Babangida up till now hasn't. Neither has General Buhari or even General Gawan. Of course, General Murtala Mohammed didn't. General Obasanjo is perhaps the only one who
Mr. Letter writer himself.
He did, and most of his writing has been extremely controversial because there are those who argue with the facts as he presents them. But I wanted you to take a look. The way I want this to work is that I'm going to mention a name, and you're going to just tell us what you made of your interaction with him. And if you didn't interact with him, you say so. Particularly, I'm going to avoid those who are late, because they are not in a position to refute whatever you say. General Gawan, you had a mixed relationship with him. He put you in solitary confinement when you returned from Biafra. But then subsequently, it seemed as if two of you reached an accommodation. He offered you an explanation for that. I don't know if you accepted it, but, you know, so what kind of relationship did you have?
I had no problem whatsoever responding to Gawan's olive branch. Which began, by the way, many people do not know, when I can't remember when he started, but he actually asked a diplomat, Adefuye.
The late Anthony.
He's late now, but he asked him, he said he wanted us to meet. He wanted Adefuye to arrange a lunch or dinner, that he wanted to meet me. That he found out a number of things, and he wanted to see me and explain to me. And I told Adefuye, I said, there's no need. I said, I found out a number of things myself, and I know exactly those who are guilty of manipulating, you know, facts and distorting and lying, and just to get me locked away after my trip to Biafra, the breakaway Biafra. But so I said, no, don't worry. I said, we'll meet. And we did meet eventually. I think it was in Binghamton University when the late Ali Mazrui invited us to a conference on the African, you know, future. And to many people's surprise, I was there ready to work with Gawan to talk about Africa, which we did. It was a very interesting meeting. That was our first meeting. Gawan couldn't do enough to make me comfortable, while I was working to assure him that there's no need, that we're okay, you know, and everything was, and we've spoken, I've visited him, I've interviewed him for BBC in one of the programs going back to Biafra, and we've spoken about the future, and he was a very young person when he took over the reins of power. He believed in what the Secret Service told him. He believed, for instance, what Antonio Nahoro, Minister of Information, told him, and he reacted to all of that. He wasn't the one who ordered me to be put in that painful situation of solitary confinement. No, it was the Ababaku around him, as usual, you know, those who want to prove that they're more patriotic, you know, more one Nigeria than the rest of the world. Functionaries, they're some of the worst people who were sometimes worse, more vicious, just more evil than even the principals who issue orders. They very often are the guilty ones.
But you did produce something which people said perhaps was your most profound writing during that period. Of course, till today, most people don't know how you managed to do that. And perhaps this would be a good opportunity for you to tell them how. But I talk about that only in reference to the fact that you were in solitary confinement. But the man died, correct me if I'm wrong, the man died, came out of that experience.
Yes.
So, again, they failed to dull that in you. I want to assume that the reason why they thought if they put you in solitary confinement was if they parted you from your books and from your writing, then of course that would break you. It didn't.
Well, once you realize what people are trying to do to you, then you can build defenses against it. The first thing is to be honest with yourself and say, for instance, you enter a place like that and you say to yourself, listen, you don't know when you're coming out here. I don't even know if you're coming out alive. The major thing is that while you're here, you make sure your mind is functioning, because that's why you've been sent into solitary confinement. And so you devise all kinds of things to create a semblance of vitality within your micro, isolated world, so that if you came out alive, you could come out still ready for battle, shall we say? Yeah. I think once you have that frame of mind, the rest is not too difficult. There were difficult moments, very difficult moments. And, but the important thing, as I said, is to arm yourself with the truth of your situation. Not say if somebody is coming to bail you out tomorrow, you're not being tried.
You're just there.
You can't appeal to anybody for bail. So, and then you protect yourself as best as you can, because you also get a feeling that they don't want you to come out alive, so that you won't be able to say certain truths which they don't like to hear. So it's a very complex one, situation, but as you see, I managed somehow.
You did. General Buhari, you interacted with him first as a much younger person when he was military head of state, and then subsequently, of course, now that he was a refined Democrat and elected leader. What was that like?
Well, let's be. You said that I interacted with him. I can reveal today, for instance, that interaction which I refused to speak about because the people didn't ask me to speak about it. It was from MEND, with which I've had an organization with which I had quite a close relation. Some of the members and so on and so forth. And MEND wanted to lay down their arms. But they wanted it to be done, they wanted to reconcile with the rest of the nation, but in a dignified and an entitled way. And they wanted somebody whom they could trust, who would tell the government that and bring back a response. That's been my only one-on-one meeting with Buhari. We met, of course, very briefly, fleetingly, during the Pronaco, when we all got together to fashion a constitution for this nation. The president at the time said it was treasonable conduct, and the police said he was going to arrest us. In fact, that was when I joined that activity, when I learned that the government and the police were going to stop citizens from meeting and debating their own future on their own terms in freedom. I said to Beko, all right, find me a chair. I'm coming to you people. Let's see what's going to happen. That's how I became a member of Pronaco at the time. And when I met Buhari, it's interesting you should raise this. One of the problems with this nation is that the majority of our thinkers and commentators don't like to accept responsibility. I used an expression at the time. I said, no, but Buhari didn't win an election. I said, Jonathan lost it. Jonathan lost it. Lost it soundly, roundly, and I told him so. When he came to Lagos to seek my support, and we met at the government house on the marina, we had a long chat, and I said, I will not support you because you lost an election because of this, and I cited and cited and cited. And like you go on, Jonathan and I have remained friends till today. It's others who keep insisting that I handed over power to Buhari.
That you took it from Jonathan.
You took it from Jonathan and gave it. It's only these submental characters, who keep insisting on this. And I keep telling them, when you've admitted your responsibility, because you have a responsibility for the way you had part responsibility for what happened under Jonathan. You didn't like people to call him to order. You defended certain things which were indefensible. You encouraged, the growth, the absolutely humongous extension of corruption under Jonathan. I mean, all the things are coming out now and so on. But I had a particular relationship with Jonathan, even when he took office. I will not tell you what he said to me when we met at Freedom at Echo Hotel during the children's something when we went together.
Yeah.
I have a personal thing with him. And that is why, since he left office, I've just ignored those who put on me enormous temptation to say, listen, if the only way I can shut you up is to criticize Jonathan, keep at it. But I won't, because I have a special bond with him. I know what we said to each other at the time. And I know why I criticized, when I criticized, why I criticized his wife, when I criticized, and why I warned. But he failed. And there's no way I will say a vote for somebody whom I know has failed. So all these people till tomorrow shouting that Soyinka put it there. And each time I open my mouth to criticize Buhari, they say, hey, but you put it. Thank you very much. And then I will shout, I say, okay, very good. And then I will say, oh, since Buhari was there, do you notice he has never criticized Buhari? These liars, sometimes Nigeria is really exhausting. The people, sometimes more than the government.
Now, someone with whom you had a fairly public set of interactions, I don't know, you can explain if that was close or not, was the evil genius. He was described, and he accepted that description because he told me himself that he didn't mind that description. General Babangida, General Ibrahim Babangida. Now you had, of course, he was in government.
Yes, I had a good.
You had a good relationship with him because under his administration, first you led the federal road safety. And then, of course, he was lucky because at the time he won the Nobel Prize. It was not too long after he took over, and the carpets were rolled out for you. I don't know how much of that you actually enjoyed, but but they were rolled out. So you had a special bond with him.
Yes. I had a very soft spot for Babangida. For one thing, I have a soft spot for people who exhibit intelligence. Sometimes, however, the intelligence is used the wrong way, and then the fight begins. But that's one. He also prepared for the role. I discovered later, because I wondered why he seemed so methodical and very thoughtful. He did something very clever, because obviously he'd been chasing power for quite some time. He'd been meaning to take power. So he created a think tank who'd written papers for him on various subjects. So when he came on board, he was able to hit the ground running and operate in directions which you had to admire. I mean, if the devil, even Abacha, does something positive, in my philosophy is that I acknowledge it and I don't deny it, and I say, okay, let's try this one. And he carried out a number of important projects while he was there. But when he began toying with the civic dignity of people, that's when things fell apart. Election, political party, one to the left, one to the right. Whose business? Why is it your business? How people decide to go? If they want to stay center, the important thing is you leave the scene. And then he kept manipulating, postponing, putting people in, bringing people out. Then he talked about money bags while people were accumulating money over there. Anyway, he also lost it. He also lost it completely. And you talked about people not writing their memoirs. I can tell you that he's writing his memoir. I happen to know somebody who's helping him write it. And I agree with you absolutely. These people who've gone there, who've been there, and I told Arab Moy the same thing when we met before, when he was still trying to hang on. And I said, listen, why don't you just retire, go to your farm, and I promise you, if you retire peacefully and something, I will come and help you write your memoirs. Your memoirs. I said, at that time he was still trying to cling to power, and we met, and I attacked me the lecture. And I said, yes, I come. I said, we'll be visiting you and learning from your mistakes as well as your achievement. That is what power should be like. That when you leave, you not only leave the country intact, but you leave certain processes from which people can learn, certain experiences. So I agree with you. I think all of us should make ourselves available. Me, no, I have my own writing to do. But those who haven't got anything, help them write their memoirs. And please do it as soon as possible so that lies can be debunked while they are still living. So that those of us who are also writing about ourselves, our lies can be debunked while there are still witnesses around. I talked just now about going through my archives. It's amazing the material which I saw there, things I had totally forgotten about. And so these, of course, we made available, and then people can construct their own histories from this this sort of material. It's the only thing left for those of us who are in the transitional space, like the country is right now.
Before, there's a picture of you at Dodden Barracks. I believe you had Chino Achebe with you, and I believe the other person was J.P. Clark. And you had gone to see Babangida. At that time, your colleague in ANA,
Vatsa.
Vatsa,
Yes.
Major General Maman Vatsa, had been convicted of coup plotting and was to be shot for it. And you had gone to plead for his life at the time.
And the others.
Yes, and the president, General Babangida, had promised he would do everything. Ultimately, he didn't succeed. When I spoke to him, he was very regretful at it, but he said he couldn't prevail. But there were other accounts that I read that indicated that that was something that you couldn't forgive him for, because you and your colleagues left with the impression that, yes, he wasn't going to be free, but he wasn't going to be killed either. But there he was. It happened. Is that true?
Yeah. It is in fact, that's one of the main breaches that I had with Babangida. Because we left him with this promise that he would do his best. And not only left him, we left buoyantly. In fact, we went and had a feast afterwards that we succeeded in saving Vatsa and the others. He gave us the impression that he would do what he wanted. And for quite a while, I didn't even want to move near anything military at the time. It was quite a slaughter. The number of people were killed in that so-called coup attempt. Now, what solved, what healed to some extent, not totally, the breach was that the young man who arranged the meeting for us, who pleaded with us, who in fact encouraged the entire venture, who was working with Babangida in Dodden Barracks at the time. In fact, I think he must have had a relation among the soldiers who were eventually sentenced to death, whether shot or not. He himself then sought us out afterwards to explain what had happened. I'd expected him, in fact, to be bitter and, just to say he was quitting everything. But he then came and said, yes, I know how you people felt. I want to assure you. He said, and you can imagine how I also felt. He said, but I want to assure you that Babangida did his best to save those people. He argued for their lives. He said, but they told him, Oga, I'm quoting him as President, Oga, please, if you can carry out your duties, step aside, and we'll do what is necessary. That's the report that you get. That made it possible over time for me to simmer down somewhat from my position, of total cut from anything, that government, military, whatever, because I felt personally betrayed. But when that young man, whose name, JP is dead also, I would have said, go and ask him what the name of the man is. When he said that, and he did have a relation, even if not a brother, within the something, I said, well, slowly, I was able to sort of thaw, shall we say. And in any case, in the military, people have their own. I often say to myself, there, but for the grace of God or whatever, Allah, or whatever, go I. Because if you remember, as you know, I nearly went into the military
as well.
myself,
Yes.
and I trained for it. But fortunately,
You probably wouldn't have survived.
I don't think I would have survived. I don't think I would have survived. So you think of all of that, and you find it easy sometimes to at least live with what you cannot really accommodate. It's when they go haywire and think they are gods, the military. That's when, the problem starts with me. You are not gods. You are just ordinary people.
As your cousin, Fela Anikulapo Kuti, said, soldier too, na person, the uniform, na clothes.
And I have family in the military. I have up to the general level, those who've been fighting Boko Haram. And I respect the military a lot. You cannot, people who put their lives on the line for whatever reason deserve some respect. It doesn't mean you treat them as gods, no, but they deserve some respect. And they deserve to be catered for, well looked after. And so when I hear, for instance, of people in uniform stealing money meant for soldiers, I really feel like going back, starting all over again, going to the military to go and deal with them. Because for me, it's the worst crime that can be committed, that you deny soldiers what they need to protect you. I find it absolutely abominable.
Professor Wole Soyinka, as always, an honor and a privilege to speak with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
That's our program today. We would, of course, like to hear from you on the conversation. Our social media handles are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Please visit our website, channelstv.com, to get started. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.